Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Leverage Redemption. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I got super excited when we saw our boy Keith David on screen. I was like, yes! Dude, it's freaking Keith David. You can't help but get excited every time Keith David shows up. I thought there was a part of me that kept wondering the entire time. I'm like, are we going to find out he's actually Elliot's dad? I was like, nah, it can't be. But it's like, no, he is. And it's like, okay, so we end up finding out that Elliot's adopted, which I love. That's the whole thing of like, yeah, why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? It's like, that your father is, that, Brianna was trying to like dance around it a little bit. But it's like, and I love that it's like, and I love Hardison be like, I always knew there was something about that boy. I always knew that you were special. It's just, welcome to the cookout. You're in the now you're in the family. And he just like, and Hardison with like that shit-eating grin. I love it so much. And it's just like, I love that's also become like more, maybe that's always been a thing, but I never heard the cookout thing until like more recent years. It's become more of a thing of like, yeah, you're invited. Kind of like the whole like you gotta pass the test before we're ready to invite you to the cookout, white folks getting brought to the cookout. It was like an SEN bit I know for a while for Roxy. Winston would be like, oh yeah, like you gotta, what you need to be prepared to come to like a black cookout or something like that. And it just kind of reminded me. That's what I'm saying. Like more recent years, I feel like this has become more and more of a thing. Maybe it always has been. I didn't remember. I wonder, maybe that's always been a thing, or does it stem from that, early to mid 2000s movie Cookout? I don't know if I'm thinking too much about it. Regardless, I think this also possibly ties into what I was talking about last episode, the conversations between Elliot and Paul. There were some things that Elliot felt like he couldn't fix, and now we have this episode next, so I can only assume, because at the time I wasn't sure if that was about his dad, because I do know that's at least one of the things with Elliot's story from the original series that was left unresolved, and now we kind of get closure on it in that regard. And I do love how that also ties into kind of Sophie's overarching story this season, because her and Harry had this really interesting conversation where Harry is like, oh, it's interesting, like you didn't stick around to glow. But for her, it's like, because of their run-in with Arthur, like a couple episodes back, it's really got her thinking about a lot of stuff. And for her, it's the collateral damage about what they do. It's like, we never really think, yeah, we're so busy taking down the bad guy and helping people, sure, but we never fully think about the collateral damage for what we cause. Because it's like, yeah, Arthur went to jail for years because of the choice that she made. And so a lot of that guilt is making her second guess herself a lot lately. And it's interesting because I feel like you can draw a direct parallel with this to some well, not a direct, but like it kind of gives me the same feel from the original series when I forgot what job it was, but there was a job where Nate was like, okay, let's do this. And they ended up, like, Nate was so focused on destroying the bad guy, taking them down, humiliating them, yada, yada, so on and so forth. He never bothered to take time to ask the client, what did they want? And it's like, right, they didn't want this person destroyed and humiliated. They wanted to kind of take a different approach. They wanted something different. And I think that's also why Nate was like, yeah, even more reason why I need to walk away, because I'm so fixated on winning and crushing someone that is like, right, I'm kind of losing sight of why we do this in the first place, and that's to help people. So that's what I'm saying. It's not a direct correlation, but it kind of made me start thinking like that with Sophie. Because I think also for Sophie too, it's like, right, I'm kind of feeling that Nate void a little bit, but I'm not Nate. I've never been Nate. That was never kind of my thing, Because Parker, because of who she is, she always had the mindset for, but I think even, there will always only be one Nate, so I think even Parker doesn't necessarily feel that, and I think, maybe Sophie does that just because it's also like her way of kind of keeping Nate alive in some sense. She kind of feels like that's who she has to be when kind of like running the crew and everything. But I just think that's such an interesting development for her, because in this episode in particular, she feels like her superpower let her down, because Harry's like, right, knowing and understanding people, like getting a good grasp on people, that's her power. But self-doubt is her kryptonite, because she's kind of, doubting herself a lot lately because of everything with Arthur, because she's so worried about making a mistake, especially in this case, because it's like, right, she's like, if I fail this, Elliot's going to blame himself, and then she's like, in that case, Elliot will end up being the collateral damage of this particular job, so. But this all stems from Elliot's hometown, which I'm also surprised they never went through the, well, I mean, who knows? Like, some of the people, because they never really go into it. Elliot's like, oh, it's like there's no friends or anything like that, because none of them probably live in town. But it's like it's one of those small towns. Because I grew up in a very small town, I would even go as far as saying, like, it's such a small town, I would almost call it a village. It's literally, you drive 2 seconds in any direction, you're basically in the next city/town. It is legitimately just that small. Like, the only thing in my hometown is 2 churches, a post office, and a high school. No lie. And even then, it's like, right, you go in, like I said, you drive, like, you hit the city is like right next, like the city limits is such an interesting place in my hometown, regardless of the tensions and all that aside. But the fact is, we never got to meet any of like Elliot's buddies, because it's a small town where you could feel like there would probably be a lot of those people who just never left home and stayed. So the fact, but maybe it's just indicative of the people that Elliot knew, or maybe it's indicative of Elliot never got too close. But I mean, yeah, because they even talked about the fact that he worked at the hardware shop. Like, he never met any of the people. But I guess it's like, right, we're trying to keep this a small enough self-contained episode. Probably doing all that could be an episode in its own right, or just like it'd be too much to fit into the episode, especially when the main focus is supposed to be between Elliot and his dad. And like, because his dad is like the main, Billy's the main person you interact with over the course of the episode. That ends up being obviously Elliot's main tie, connection in this episode to the town, and obviously, once again, just being his dad. So, but we do find out what the bad blood in that family stems from. He was never too keen on Elliot joining the army. It seems like obviously they have not been in touch for so long that like when Elliot prepared a meal, he was almost like, wait, you fix it? It's like, yeah, we've known for years that Elliot is a fantastic cook, that he has extremely amazing culinary skills, but his dad wouldn't know that because they haven't talked in so long. Either way, it turns out the thing that also like made a big divide in their family is Elliot didn't show up to his mom's funeral. I mean, first and foremost, his dad is like, right, you joined the army when I didn't want you to, and then you also ended up missing him, which for him, it's like, right, they send me out on jobs in special forces, and I did stuff I am not proud of, and the fact is that they made it so I couldn't come home to mom's funeral, and it's just, because his dad had to do that on his own. It's like, this is your mom's funeral, and you couldn't even be bothered. It's not, regardless of the circumstances, because it's also still a thing of probably in his mind too. It's like, regardless of what the circumstances are, you made the decision to join the military, and, so you kind of have to take some of that onus on you for like, yeah, they might have played their part, but you wouldn't even be in that situation if you had never joined the military. But Elliot pouring his heart out, being like, no, you're the reason why. Like, you told all those stories, and he was like, it's like, he's like, you were a hero. He's like, they gave that medal, like, for what we did, what I did, like the heroics you claim. I didn't get a medal for it. It was some lily white boy from Kentucky that got that medal. And what did I get? I got like a bad hip, and a constant, like, lifelong struggle with the VA, about, once again, that's a big conversation here in the States of, like, I don't know if any other, like, obviously, like, I have a very, U.S. centric view, because that's the, my worldview is very limited just because of that. Like, I'm not well versed in everything out there in the world and internationally, but I know that's a big thing in the U.S. I just don't know how big of the treatment of veterans. I don't know, like, whether the U.S. is kind of like the only country that has that issue. Is that kind of not as much of an issue internationally or not? Either way, so that's a conversation in its own right. But it's like, yeah, for him, it's like, hey, you could have been whatever you wanted to be. I wanted you, like, me and your mom wanted your life to be somewhere where you could be whatever you wanted to be. And for you to join the military is kind of a slap in the face in that regard, And it's so interesting too. And I thought it was so beautiful how Billy was actually giving the same advice to Brianna. It's like, wait, you're hacking and doing all that stuff on the tablet? It's like, right, like, why don't you, like, work at a tech company or something, and it's like, there's a neat direct parallel though. And even Brianna walks away at the end of this episode being like, yeah, I think I will, like, keep that in mind. I also love her being like, oh, like, I didn't expect your hometown, your childhood to be so Smallville-ish. And it's like, oh, what were you expecting? And she's like, Gotham? I'm like, really? I mean, I get it, Elliot being Elliot, but like we always know, like, you know, Elliot's kind of a good old country boy. So you're kind of like, it's kind of what I expected. I would have never thought to make the direct parallel to Smallville, Clark Kent, you know, the Kents and stuff like that. But it's like, yeah, you can, which is so funny when you like deep dive that too, because it's just like, well, Keith David was most recently in a DC property. Most recently, he's probably been in one before, and I'm trying to not think off the top of my head, but he was voicing Mr. Bones in DC Stargirl, so that was like only like a couple weeks ago, episode-wise. But either way, just interesting timing and stuff like that. But regardless, I mean, it's Keith David. You know, Keith David is always going to be in the conversation. You don't need him to work on something super recently for you to be willing to throw Keith David's name into the mix. But tangents and all that aside. But I'm also like, yeah, you think Elliot grew up in what is literally, in my opinion, the most crime-riddled fictional city in existence? You know, the darkest, most crime-riddled city in existence, you know? So I thought that was interesting. I also love that thing of, yes, Elliot wanted to handle this situation alone, because the whole point was, hey, he wanted to go tell his father something. The thing he wanted to tell his father, I figured it was like, oh, I'm sorry, but I didn't know what the story was going to be about, not being here, not being around. It's like, I was kind of in the right ballpark, but like I said, it was about not being there for his mom's funeral. But Elliot wanted to handle this alone, but it's like, no, Parker got sent for emotional support, and Brianna's there because it's like, well, because Parker might not know what emotional support is, and like, yeah, it's like, yeah, Elliot's lucky to have that emotional support, he jokingly says, obviously at the beginning, but it's also a thing of, yeah, like, he didn't have to do this alone because he had his team by his back, his other family by his side. He was able to kind of help resolve everything. Like, I've been so, like, talking about, like, the emotional beats and that side of things, but the actual, like, job itself, it's, like I said, was about stopping fracking in this town, and they thought like, hey, if they could get the attorney general on their side, he'd be able to swing things, but it turns out, nope, he's actually a part of this. There were investigations like trying to get this shut down, but he's the one who gets to decide whether or not something kind of goes to court or not, or like, you know, whether like something goes through like in that investigation type of way. So he ended up shutting down the investigation, and now he's making a profit off of these fracking rigs, and he's trying to make it so that more and more are put in this town. Because at first, when he was showing off his place to Harry and Sophie, I was thinking to myself, I was like, you guys don't actually live here, because he's trying to present it too much of like, yeah, you know, because the whole point is like, right, you got, because especially because he was hesitant to have like the meeting at their house, but they really pushed for it, because the whole thing is like, right, there's a rig nearby, fracking rig. If we kind of show him the bad side of things, he'll go back and like have no choice but to, you know, really push this investigation. And that's where Sophie felt like, right, she completely misread this guy, because once again, she's just so riddled with self-doubt now that she was kind of slipping up because of everything. And so, but I almost wondered for a second, I was like, I mean, it never came up, so I was like, oh, I get, because at first I was like, are they paid actors pretending to be your wife and your daughter? But it's like, no, but it's like, right, it's such a foreign home to them, because they probably legitimately haven't lived there in so many years. So it's like, oh, he even tried to be like, oh yeah, we bounced back and forth. It's like, no, who knows how long you've actually lived here? There was almost some photos up that are like, are those stock photos in the background? I'm like, it seemed like that place was just set up to be like, oh yeah, like, let's pretend like we've been living here, try to put like on this like happy all-American family, this is our home sweet home, always be a special place. And yeah, we bounce between here and somewhere else, but it's like, yeah, well, this is our dear home. Like, it came off like fake. Once again, might have just been a sign of like, once again, Sophie kind of slipping a little bit. Maybe that's kind of what that's supposed to be, kind of indicating to some extent. But yeah, the Attorney General's just as much at fault in all of this. But that's because of that, their plans to get what they needed didn't work out. And I even love that at one point, Billy came in to see them all like in front of like the screens and stuff like that. He's looking and he just tosses his hands up in the air and just walks away. I love it. But he was kind of frustrated and kind of walked away, which I love that Brianna's like, oh no, it was either Brianna or Parker that was just like, wow, father like son. It's like, yeah, Elliot's so much like his dad. It's wild. But I did love them being able to kick ass together. I love that he was like, oh, hey son, what smells like a fracking rig and screams like a girl, kind of like twists or breaks a guy's arm and then punches him in the face. Because even earlier on when Elliot like helped him out, when him, Brianna, and Parker helped out, like he seemed like he was holding his own, and it's just like, yeah, them kind of going toe to toe with everybody. I love that. That was actually pretty dope. Showcasing like, yeah, like Elliot got that fight in him from his dad, so I thought that was actually pretty dope. And obviously, our heroes come out the victors in the end, and they end up exposing the attorney general, because the whole reason why he was doing all this, because he's trying to avoid any like lawsuits and stuff, because he would basically have to pay $60 million out to this town, and he doesn't want to do that, obviously. So he was trying to rig everything to kind of go in his favor, like make all the people who are testing results like, no, these are my people. They're going to like look over a lot of stuff, and they're going to return the results to be like, nope, the fracking, the fact is that there's no methane in the water, making it flammable, Has that Michigan thing, like, I haven't kept up with that in a while, like, oh god, Flint, Michigan, did that situation ever get resolved? So I looked up in it to a small degree. So reading some, a little bit of articles from this year, I don't want to speak with certainty because, once again, I don't live in Flint, Michigan. So because that was kind of the direct parallel I think this episode was kind of going for. That I think that situation's slightly better in some regards, but it's still this like lasting issues trickling down from it. Because I was looking into it, so it seems like this has been going on since 2014. I didn't realize that's when it started, but it's one of those things in the general zeitgeist, like. And that's that. I mean, I think that's a sad aspect of it. I'm sure for a lot of people in that town, it's that thing of like, right, people kind of do forget about it. But I'm sure, hopefully there are plenty of people who haven't. But it's like, yeah, because even I was like, yeah, I hadn't thought about that in years. But I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty sad thing. I mean, it's not like, hey, this is, there's that. I think we can all have that disconnect sometimes where it's like, hey, this is something that's happening across the world, so it might not be always present in your mind, but it's like, yeah, this might be in a different state, but it is here in the U.S. It's in the same country I live in, so it is that conversation. It's that type of thing where it's just like I need to be more aware and more apparent of that type of stuff. I mean, and not even just, and even on the example of something being farther away in a different country, I still need to keep that in my mind. It doesn't change, because there are just some things that I feel like get reported on way more than others, and so like some of that stuff just kind of slips from the general populace's mind, not everyone's mind, but and once again, I'm speaking, I shouldn't talk in such generalities. I should just be speaking just from my personal point of view in that regard. But yeah, like I said, this episode just got me thinking about it, and like I said, I think that was probably like the direct parallel that they were going for. But luckily, in this situation, they were able to stop the fracking. I mean, obviously, very much like the Flint, Michigan thing, it is still going to be like there are going to be lasting effects because there were people who got sick and hospitalized for this. So who knows what the long-term effects are going to be for them and their families? Because it is this situation of like, right, the fracking rigs brought job opportunities to the town, which they needed, but it was like, this opportunity was also killing the town at the same time. There was even this line from Harry where he was like, because apparently like this could also lead to like cancer in people, and Harry's like, oh yeah, it's actually kind of hard to prove that in court. And Sophie's like, seriously? And it's like, he's like, all right, that's another thing I have to add to the list. It's like, oh, so Harry's been on that side of things where he's, had to argue about someone's cancer not being a result of like a fracking thing or something like that. It's like, I mean, he admits, but he also admits like, I came to my realization about like the evil ways of my lawyering. I came to that a little too late in life type of situation. So, but like I said, at the very least, everything was kind of resolved, and Elliot and his father have a strong bond. I even love that it's like, because because she was worried. Parker was like, "Oh, are you dying?" He's like, "No," because she was like, "What? If you are dying," because she was trying to figure out what he came here to tell his dad. She's like, "If you are dying, let us know so that me and Hardison could get your robot body prepared." Which I'm like, I love that gag has come back about, not even a gag. I'm sure they are both serious about the whole robot body thing. I even love that before Parker leaves, she's like, "All right, so next time I'll get to tell you more about the robot body stuff." And Elliot's just like, "Damn it!" And Billy's like, "Oh, okay." I did love that. It's nice that once again the team got to meet Elliot's family and Elliot's dad got to meet the rest of his team, and that also plays into the beautiful moment that they had where it's a thing of he talks about, like, Elliot was like, "Right, my team, we don't get recognized, big recognition for what we do," and he's like, "That's fine, because all that what we do matters to the people we helped." And he's like saying the same thing to his dad. It's like, the people you served with, they know what you did. They remember. So and at the end of the day, that's all that matters, because you're their hero. And he is like, and in their eyes, you're their hero. You're a hero, mine too. And it's like them getting like, because Elliot does get sentimental from time to time, but he always kind of puts up a wall and kind of, but like seeing him like vulnerable like that with his father, I thought that was beautiful, them hugging it out, because they're both, it's like, right, so many wasted years. It's like, yeah, but we have years we still have plenty of years ahead of us. I thought that was so beautiful. And him giving his dad that picture of him from years ago was like, "Oh, you were like teaching," like he was in a football jersey and stuff like that. And I thought that was beautiful, because his dad is like a football coach and stuff. So like he probably was one even back then. Because he wanted to go and be play football, but after his injuries while in the military, he couldn't go, and he kind of wanted that to kind of, because Elliot was so athletic. It's like you could have made something of yourself. Which, to be fair, Elliot has used his athletic skills to become a big deal in both hockey and baseball, so there is that, I mean, granted, he can't take too much advantage of it, because, like, well, those circumstances were limited circumstances, so. And it was obviously all for, like, covers and jobs that, the particular jobs they were pulling at the time, so it's like, right, they were tied to these specific identities, and yeah. Because I remember, like, the baseball situation, he ended up kind of having to disappear afterwards, and it's just like, yeah, that 15 minutes of fame lasted a bit, but like all 15 minutes of fame eventually withered away, so. But yeah, that was kind of a, like I said, a neat and beautiful and very heartfelt thing. It's just kind of like once again, it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, I need to call my dad. It's just it's one of those type of situations, so. But like I said, I also do love the whole situation with Sophie too. Like, this, I think, helped probably sway some of that self-doubt. Now, whether that's completely gone or not, we'll have to wait and see. I had brought it up before, especially because Arthur made that point of like, yeah, there's still plenty of people out there who you screwed over in some shape or form. So I think she might have to come to terms with that. The collateral damage might come back in full swing this season, especially, whether it's Arthur himself or whether it's just like people just specifically tied to Sophie, that were collateral damage of what she did. I think that will present very interesting stories, especially considering where the direction of this season seems to be going with her overarching story. So just overall, a very heartfelt episode. And like I said, I think it's nice that after all these years, not even just for the context of Elliot, because obviously it's been a very long time. It's been, things been bad between him and his dad for a long time. But just in the context of this series, for him to finally get closure after all these years, as the audience knowing that him and his dad had their issues, for them to finally have closure is kind of nice in that regard too. So. Very, very excited to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.